Three inmates, three things they experienced from inside a cell that staff never fully explained. A man in solitary confinement who counted the same 41 footsteps passing his door every night at the same hour, in a wing that records show had been empty of any other inmate for that entire month. A man who shared a cell with the same roommate for 2 years and only discovered after his release that, according to every official housing record, he had been listed as housed alone the entire time. And a man on death row who began receiving messages tapped through the wall in a pattern he slowly realized was not random, and that led him to a discovery about the inmate who had occupied that cell decades before him. These are accounts from people who lived inside it. Lights off, headphones on. Marcus spent 14 months in administrative segregation at a maximum security facility in Indiana following an incident that occurred during his second year of incarceration. Segregation meant 23 hours a day alone in a cell roughly 8 feet by 10 feet, with 1 hour permitted for solitary outdoor recreation in a small enclosed yard. In segregation, time became something Marcus measured differently than he ever had before. He described later, in an interview conducted after his release, that the only reliable marker of time passing was the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside his door, officers conducting rounds, other inmates being escorted to and from recreation or medical appointments. In his third month, Marcus began noticing a specific pattern. Every night, beginning around what he estimated to be 11 p.m., he heard footsteps approaching from the end of the corridor. He counted them, out of boredom more than anything else, 41 steps, consistently, before the sound stopped directly outside his cell door for several seconds, and then continued past, fading toward the opposite end of the corridor. This happened every night, same count, same pause outside his door, same continuation. He assumed it was a guard conducting a check. He mentioned it once to an officer during a meal delivery, asking who did the 11 p.m. round. The officer told him that segregation rounds at that hour were conducted alone by a single officer, walking the full corridor in approximately 15 seconds given its length, nowhere near enough time for 41 individual footsteps at a normal walking pace. Marcus began timing the pattern more deliberately. He confirmed it continued nightly for the next several weeks, 41 steps, a pause outside his door, continuation. In his 5th month in segregation, during a meeting with his assigned counselor, Marcus mentioned the pattern as part of a broader discussion about his sleep difficulties. The counselor, reviewing his housing unit's occupancy records as part of standard documentation, told him something that Marcus said changed how he understood every night since. For the entire previous month, the exact period during which Marcus had continued to hear the nightly 41 footsteps, Segregation Wing C, where his cell was located, had housed no other inmates besides himself. He had been the sole occupant of the entire wing. No transfers in or out were logged. No other inmate had been physically present in that corridor for that entire month. Marcus requested and was permitted to review the unit's electronic door log for the relevant nights as part of his complaint. The log showed only the single nightly officer round, lasting the expected 15 seconds, with no other door access or corridor activity recorded. The sound, by every official record, should not have existed. Marcus was released from segregation 2 months later following a disciplinary review. He said the footsteps continued, unchanged, for every remaining night he spent in that wing. He never determined a source. He said the part he has never been able to explain to anyone since is that after the 1st month, he stopped being afraid of it and started waiting for it instead, because counting it was the only thing that made the nights pass at all.
Terrence served just over 2 years at a medium security facility in Georgia. housed for the majority of that sentence in a shared two-person cell with a man named Bobby, who he came to know well over their time together. Their shared work assignment in the kitchen, their conversations during recreation hour, the small routines that develop between two people sharing an 8 by 12-foot space for years. Terrence was released in early 2023. As part of his standard exit process, he was provided with a copy of his complete institutional file, which inmates are entitled to request under state policy. Reviewing his file weeks after his release, Terrence noticed something in his housing history section that he initially assumed was a clerical error. For the entire period he had shared a cell with Bobby, just over 20 months, his official housing record listed his cell assignment as single occupancy. No second inmate was listed as ever having been assigned to that cell during that period. According to the facility's own records, Terrence had been housed alone the entire time. Terrence contacted the facility's records office directly, requesting clarification, and provided Bobby's full name and inmate identification number as he remembered it from mail and commissary slips they had exchanged. The records office responded that no inmate matching that name or identification number had any record of incarceration at that facility or within the state correctional system during the relevant time period. Terrence pursued the matter further, eventually obtaining, through a public records request, the facility's commissary purchase logs for his housing unit during that period, a separate system from the housing database, maintained by a different department. Commissary logs for a two-person cell typically show purchases attributed to each occupant by their individual account. The logs for Terrence's cell during that period showed commissary purchases and account activity consistent with two distinct spending patterns and two distinct account numbers, his own and a second account number that, when Terrence requested follow-up information on it, returned no associated inmate name in the current system, only a note indicating the account had been administratively closed and archived. Terrence has photographs from a facility-sanctioned event during that period, a holiday gathering in the unit day room, that he shows standing beside another man in facility uniform that he identifies as Bobby. The facility, when shown the photograph as part of Terrence's continued inquiry, confirmed the image was authentic and taken at the documented event, but stated they could not identify the second individual in the photograph using any current system. Terrence said in an account he later gave publicly that he does not believe Bobby was anything other than a real person he lived with for nearly 2 years. What he cannot explain, and what the facility has never been able to explain to him, is how a real person who left a financial and photographic trail across 2 years and multiple record-keeping systems could simultaneously not exist in the one record, the official housing assignment log, that was supposed to be the most basic proof that he had ever been there at all.
Now. This is the part 2 of our prison horror series. Part 1 covered what staff discovered. This one covers what inmates lived through. Hit the like button too. Story 3 is next, and it is the one that connects to something far older than the cell itself. Anthony was housed on death row at a facility in Texas for 6 years before a successful appeal led to his sentence being reduced and his transfer to general population. Death row housing at that facility consisted of individual cells along a single corridor with extremely limited interaction between inmates. Communication, where it occurred, often happened through tapping or speaking through ventilation shafts and shared walls. In his second year on the row, Anthony began noticing a tapping pattern coming through the wall shared with the adjacent cell, which had been unoccupied since his arrival. The tapping was irregular at first. He assumed it was the building settling, pipes, or maintenance work.
Over several months, the tapping became more structured. Anthony, who had read about historical prisoner communication methods during his appeals research, began to suspect the pattern resembled a structured code rather than random noise. He began documenting it on paper, smuggled notes during his limited interactions with another inmate 2 cells down, who had some background in amateur radio and basic code systems before his incarceration. Working together over the better part of a year, passing notes during the brief windows when cells were unlocked for showers, the 2 men determined that the tapping followed a consistent rhythmic pattern that, when mapped against a simplified tap code historically used in solitary confinement and POW communication, spelled out repeating sequences, not sentences, numbers, repeated in the same order over and over for months. A sequence of 7 digits, followed by a pause, followed by the same 7 digits again. Anthony's research-minded fellow inmate recognized the 7-digit sequence format as consistent with an older state inmate identification number format, a numbering system the facility had used decades earlier before transitioning to its current 10-digit system in the early 1990s. Anthony submitted a formal records request through his appeals attorney, asking the facility to identify which inmate had been assigned that specific 7-digit identification number under the old system, and which cell that inmate had occupied. The records, when eventually produced after his attorney's persistent follow-up, confirmed that the number had belonged to an inmate executed at that same facility in 1987, in the cell directly adjacent to Anthony's, the cell that had remained unoccupied for the entirety of Anthony's time there. Facility records separately confirmed there had been no incidents of plumbing, structural settling, or maintenance work logged for that specific cell or the adjoining wall during the entire period Anthony documented the tapping. The tapping stopped, by Anthony's account, the week after his attorney received the confirmed identification match, the same week Anthony was informed his appeal had succeeded and that he would be transferred out of death row housing. Anthony has since been released following a full sentence reduction. He has spoken about the experience only twice publicly. Both times, when asked what he believed the tapping was trying to communicate, he gave the same answer. He said he did not believe it was trying to say anything. He said he believed it was simply counting, the same way he had counted his own days on that row for 37 years in the only language that cell had ever allowed anyone to use.
3 men, 3 cells. 3 things that confinement itself made impossible to ignore and impossible to fully explain. Footsteps that should not have existed. A roommate erased from the one record that should have proven he was real. And a number tapped through a wall for 37 years belonging to a man who had been gone for decades. All 3 men were eventually released or transferred. None of them have forgotten the sound of their own cell.
Hit the like button right now. It tells YouTube to put these stories in front of more people. Subscribe to Mr. Fadoo Horror if you are not already. This was part 2 of our prison horror series. Part 3 covers what happened during visitation, and it is coming soon. Drop a comment below. Which story disturbed you the most? The 41 footsteps, the roommate, or the tapping? I read every reply. I will see you in the next one.